And we're live.
Good morning and afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to OAG's latest webinar. Unbelievably, it's 2026. How did that happen? But we're delighted to be here and looking forward to delving into the European aviation market today with a bit of our usual roundup of global capacity. To do that, I am delighted to be joined by Petri Vuori, who is Senior VP of Sales and Route Development at Finavia, Finland's airport operator. Welcome, Petri. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Deirdre, and good morning to everybody, and good morning to John as well.
And of course, we're joined by John also. Welcome back, John, 2026.
Yes.
It feels like it's been a while since we've been here having this kind of conversation, but
yeah, we had one in December, didn't we? But it's only what 28 days, and there's already lots happening. Stories, mergers potentially in the US, weather disruption, aircraft orders. Yeah, it's the same stuff. So it's another year, but I think reasons to be optimistic this year.
Oh, still holding on to that optimism. I like that.
I told you it's on the tablets now, so it's completely optimistic.
I think if nothing else, we've discovered, haven't we, over the course of running these webinars, there's always something to talk about in this industry.
Yeah.
With that in mind, so as I said, we're going to have a bit of a dive into Europe today. We're going to look at some numbers and some capacity statistics around regional airports, routes, and airlines. And as ever, we'll be taking your questions as we go. So please don't hesitate to drop in with those. Okay, let's get to our first slide. So those of you who join us regularly will know that we like to always just have this kind of line in the sand, I guess you could put it that way. This is global capacity, and we've been tracking this for a number of years. Back to 2019, the black line at the bottom, and we've got 24, 25, and then capacity for 26 for the first quarter of the year. What we're seeing for quarter one this year is a slight improvement, 3.8% ahead of 25. Growth rate last year was 3.1%. Now that might just be January optimism. But yeah, not a bad way to start the year, I guess, notwithstanding.
Is whisper it quietly, but perhaps some of the supply chain issues that we faced in the last couple of years are beginning to lessen.
Okay.
With seeing aircraft availability improving, the lease rates are coming down slightly, which is an indicator of more supply out there. So I think that's positive, and there's more confidence in parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East. I mean, a lot of this is driven by capacity growth in the Middle East and Central Asia, and yeah, it looks good for the first quarter. And of course, this year, the first quarter, like last year, doesn't include Easter, so we'll also have the Easter spike in April that will improve demand as well, capacity and demand. So it's looking quite good.
I think what's interesting is last year we sort of saw just a steadier picture, didn't we, in terms of how growth was happening through the year. You know, there wasn't sort of the previous year we'd had a bit of more in the peak seasons, and you know, sort of dampening off in the shoulder seasons. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out anyway for.
But we
the rest of this year.
Talk about every year about, you know, how do we stretch the shoulder seasons out? But when you look at this chart, it is just
no evidence of that.
No, it is exactly the same shape in July and August as it has been in 2019 and every year since. And it is just the way the market behaves.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, when we look at regions, because I was sort of going to say there, well, sometimes that sort of trend is masked, isn't it, when you look up at a global level, and maybe next time we'll take a look at the seasonality profile by region. I suspect it won't be any different based on the sort of last time we looked at it. But just looking at Q1 growth this year versus last year. Global domestic growth is about 2.5%. Africa remains robustly above that, 9.6% capacity, which of course is boosted by growth in Morocco's domestic market and other domestic markets in North Africa. North America's domestic market kind of ticks along, doesn't it? Fairly mature, 1 to 1.2% is typically what we tend to see. But what stands out a little here is that Europe is lagging. So it's the only region that's seeing contraction in its domestic markets. And we'll dive into a bit more of that as we go.
We need to look at the detail, like it always, these high-level aggregated numbers. You don't actually see some of the granularity behind it. It's quite interesting what's happening there. Latin America. I mean, some of the geographic challenges. I mean, Colombia is a market where we see lots of growth in recent times because of just pure geography. Air travel's the only way to get around. And then Brazil is another market that's got a very large domestic component. So it's a mixed bag. And the Southwest Pacific is predominantly Australia. Of course, there's a little bit of New Zealand, and some of our former colleagues who are in New Zealand will continually tell us how successful they are at growing the domestic market at their particular airport. So that's positive in some ways, and that's a function of geography as well, isn't it? Big cities, large distances between each location.
Yeah. And then moving on to international, we have got a much more optimistic picture. So the global international capacity growth rate is double, domestic, more than double actually, 5.7%. And of course, as you alluded to earlier, there are a number of regions that are pushing that. The Middle East up 8.4%. Obviously with a whole raft of capacity network growth coming from Saudi, the UAE, and other markets in the region, and then Southwest Pacific. So all of the Australians and Kiwis are getting back to exploring the world, and it's obviously peak season there, their summer holiday equivalent, but there's some strong capacity growth happening there, albeit on a smaller scale. And Asia continues to be strong, and Europe too, bang on average in terms of the global trend. But we'll also look a bit into that.
And it's interesting when you look at North America, because that's a capacity increase of 0.6%. And you're hearing more and more stories about how soft international travel to the United States is looking this coming summer for a variety of reasons, which is quite interesting because the US dollar is actually weakening quite considerably at the moment, which makes it more attractive for international visitors. But they've got the World Cup coming. They've obviously got some immigration issues that they're trying to address. But you would expect to see the US international market in a stronger and healthier growth position than that at the moment. It's
an interesting one to watch, isn't it? Petri, sorry, you were going to come in there.
No, sorry, I pressed something, but no, go ahead.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think we'll do a deeper look at North America next month. We've talked about this before, haven't we? You've got this huge domestic market that travels internally for leisure as well as business, which will continue. And only this morning I saw a sort of news article about the perennial appeal of US destinations and the extent to which, there are obviously a section of various country markets that just won't travel because of all the things that are happening. But equally, the lure of the known destinations, Disney, Vegas, the mountains, the landscape, all of those things. So it's a really interesting one to watch, isn't it? The extent to which political turmoil, is that a phrase we could use? And all of the other things that are going on.
And international
to what
travel.
extent will that impact the market?
I think it's as much about sentiment, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've seen that in Canada, certainly.
And we're still seeing huge appetite for outbound travel, of course, from the US to Europe. There's nothing to suggest that that's going to slow down this summer. It's been a feature post-pandemic, hasn't it? That
airlines like United, bet the house on seasonal European services to secondary markets.
Yeah.
So one question. Sorry, Deirdre. One question to John on that Q1 number is that how big a role has the Canadian snowbird travel during the Q1 to US? Because I guess that capacity is down and demand as well.
Well, that's kind of you to segue to a blog I wrote, Petri, on exactly that issue. And you obviously haven't read it yet, but
I will.
Thank you. Canadians are going to destinations in the Caribbean. They've started moving into Mexico, particularly from the West Coast US down into Mexican resort destinations. Cancun's inevitably benefited as it does from such things. The real deep question is going to be how many Canadians ultimately realise it's just as cheap to go to those destinations as it is to go as a snowbird to Florida or Arizona at this time of year and elect to go back to the Caribbean next year or the year after. That's the litmus test, I think. But it's capacity's down by about 10% for the first quarter from Canada to the US, and it's principally Canadian carriers who've dropped that capacity. And they've had one airline which doesn't help.
Yeah. Okay. Coming back to Europe, let's look at the next chart. So, coming back to that sort of European domestic capacity lag, what we have set out here is the biggest Western European domestic markets and their capacity position for quarter one in 19, 25 and 26. And interestingly, when we first prepped this chart, we didn't have 19 because, trying to move on from the past. But when I was looking at the percentage changes, I wanted to actually just see is some of what we're seeing in Spain, for example, where there's a drop in capacity, a considerable drop this quarter, a resetting. And it's interesting because Spain almost stands alone in terms of the bigger markets by its post-19 position, as in capacity, even in 25 was quite a bit higher than it had been in 19. So there had been growth in Spain's domestic market, boosted by primarily low-cost carrier growth. You can see for many of the other markets, and the dark line here on this chart is the percentage change versus 19, that many domestic markets in Europe saw a considerable reduction, or have seen post-pandemic, with less either a conscious shift, as we've seen in Germany, France, and Sweden in particular, to reduce domestic travel from an environmental perspective, but also just a shift in terms of how people travel around, particularly for business purposes in domestic markets. So interesting, and I guess gives context to, there are some capacity changes year on year as well, but these are markets that are still significantly smaller than they were
so tough.
Pandemic.
As an airline to and Petri, I mean, from your experience at Finnair, profitable domestic flying, it's just so hard to make it work on a year-round basis. The fares are typically lower than international yields. You've still got the same operating cost. It's a really tough nut to crack in any country, I think, in Europe.
And actually in Northern Europe, you also have higher operational costs due to the winter conditions, de-icing, etc. But one thing what Deirdre mentioned already, that I guess most of these domestic drops are due to the decrease in the work-related travel, where we have the ESG reporting by companies now. You have to include all the air travel and the emissions from there, but also the possibility to have internal, sometimes external meetings on Teams or similar products. So the 2019 is not going to be back soon.
No, and the Spain numbers are a couple of factors there. Obviously, there's a lot of islands that are included in the Spanish numbers, and they've seen a lot of capacity growth and competition in the last couple of years. And they've had Ryanair until this year, of course, being particularly expansive in their domestic operations in Spain, and they've pulled back because of their dispute with AENA. So that's partly behind that. But it's really hard, I think, and it highlights what we're going to talk about for domestic airports. How can you survive as a domestic airport when you've got all of that infrastructure, all of those resources that are open for 18 hours or whatever it has to be, and the best flying? It's really difficult. How do you stimulate traffic demand, and more importantly, how do you diversify your airport to create new revenue streams?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just coming back to the deck for a moment, and apologies, I don't know if it's my signal that felt a little bit flaky there, but you were dropping in and out, John. So I suspect it's my signal, not anything else. But if you lose me, then hopefully it'll kick back in. Taking it, sort of just expanding it a little bit more. I think what also is happening, not unexpectedly, is, so this is just looking at 26 versus 25 percentage change across those same markets. We'll come back to the Finland story in a moment, Petri. But actually, you've also got change that is being driven by airline position and airline strategic moves, for want of a better word. So on the right here, we've taken those percentage capacity reductions, looked at the absolutes, and broken down by carrier type, so low cost in the dark blue, mainline in the lighter blue. What's actually going on here. So in Spain, the majority of that reduction is Ryanair pulling capacity out of the Spanish market, and to some extent redistributing it elsewhere in their network. In Italy, a different story. It's ITA reductions, perhaps being offset by Ryanair putting in more capacity and EasyJet to some extent. The UK, a different story again. Obviously, we had the loss of Eastern and Blue Islands at the end of last year. So I think that's really interesting, isn't it? So you can't sort of say, if nothing else, this reinforces for me that it's hard to sort of group Europe as the trend in Europe is that this is what's happening. The reality is there are different things happening in lots of different markets.
Yeah,
and
it's
not
such a place. I mean, you know, you look at either end of the spectrum geographically. I mean, obviously Finland, Petri can share more insights, and then Spain down 3.7%. Yeah, Norway 4%.
Yes.
And funny enough, the Finland growth, although it's domestic flight, the growth is coming from the demand from international passengers. So that this is all of that growth is Helsinki to Lapland, the winter wonderland during this Q1, and we know that those flights have more than half international transfer passengers. So as Deirdre said, that the message from different markets is totally different. We are of course happy about that. Lapland is growing as it is. Also on
another nice segue, Petri, into our next slide, which is just a little dig into what's happening in Finland, and obviously so here we've got the domestic picture, so up almost 6%, 5.9. This is winter season now. 24 versus 25, and sort of steadier growth on international. But I think Rovaniemi up almost 16% this winter, and Helsinki even more. So there's capacity, obviously, just right across the winter. But I think if we looked just at the peak, December, January, there's a strong uplift.
And the Q1 is totally different picture from the other quarters, or at least Q2 or Q3 for us, because now the winter leisure demand for north of Europe is been increasing past 3 years quite significantly. I mean, Rovaniemi has had now 3 years of more than 20% growth, annual growth, and I think I can share that our colleagues in Norway have had the same with Tromsø. Iceland has their success. So the northern part of Europe is really increasing in demand, and also supply side during the winter months.
Is that sustainable over? I mean, you talk about 20% growth in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
The infrastructure that needs to go with that it's got to grow as well.
That's true, and this is the thing we are always wondering after the season, that how will the next season look like, because in most cases the airlines are only going to make their network decisions in March, April, when they see how the winter season ends, compared to the regular summer routes they have. They might make their decision much earlier, and in each year we have now, for the 3 years, we have wondered that where will all the people go. I mean, the hotel beds are not increasing that much, but the passengers seem to find a way. And of course, the Airbnb is the one which has been able to increase the hotel or the beds much faster than the hotels. But if somebody was going to ask me, is Rovaniemi going to be 20 or 30% growth next winter season, I couldn't tell. So we are really wondering ourselves about this. We increased the capacity of the air side of our terminal and for this season, and that helped. But still, there are some days of congestion. But we can so far we can handle it, and then everything runs smoothly. But we are happy about the Lapland growth, but I'm sure that there will be some hiccups at some point.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because
you build all that capacity for the first quarter of the year, and as you rightly say, for the other 3 quarters of the year, you know, you've got a lot of spare capacity. So can you create, or can the tourism board create new product that can fill in some of that? And are you going to transition a European sun-seeking holidaymaker to a northern European nature experience?
Interesting, though. Yeah, interesting, because the capacity numbers for summer, so summer 25 versus 24 in this chart, and then winter on the right, suggests that there's and you know, this is percentage, not volume, but suggests that across some markets there's strong growth in the summer season. USA, Japan, Turkey, China. even Thailand in there. So I guess it's my interpretation, and you can put us right or wrong on this, Petri, is that is it spillover from the winter season? Perhaps not, but is this people chasing a different type of holiday experience in terms of summer in markets where there isn't necessarily over tourism and there are forests and clean air and all of those sorts of things,
or is this Finnair ultimately having to flip their network?
Yeah,
it's more of John's analysis that it's Finnair and transfer traffic, but of course there are always some who are then staying in the country for tourism reasons. And this is something we have discussed with our Nordic colleagues as well, that do they already see that there is this kind of escape from the extreme heat during the summer months, and some are seeing it, but the masses are not doing it yet. So I know most of the Brits want to go to the Ibiza sandy beaches and all the night fun rather than coming to the north of Europe. But there's always some who enjoy the cooler air and also the nature activities.
Maybe the challenge of some of your more northern locations is that you don't have any nightlife in the summer because you don't have night.
There's no night. You don't have to sleep at all. So.
Well, then it's an all-night party, isn't it?
Extended value for money, I guess, is one way of selling it.
Yeah, you don't even have a hotel then.
No,
you don't need to sleep.
It's interesting, isn't it? It only takes a bad winter in Northern Europe for those summer holidays to the warmer climes become more of an essential. And someone's asked about is it the rise of the coolcation as Southern Europe gets hotter? We're not really seeing that, are we, yet in terms of the absolute numbers? I think we looked at this last summer.
Last summer wasn't as bad as summer 24 because we saw lots of stories in summer 24 about Greek islands burning, people being rushed out from hotels, etc. And there didn't seem to be as much of that last year. But I do remember the CEO of TUI saying that he felt that with global warming, the Baltic states and Northern Europe was going to become an increasingly popular summer destination. And I think there's some truth to that.
As James asked about coolcation, as the term goes about this phenomenon, is something that probably will be the active holidaymakers that come first. So those who just want to be on the beach for 1 week and having their fun might not be the ones that are coming on the first wave. But then when you look at the active holidaymakers, then you're actually competing against the Alps, for example, where people go hiking and biking and whatever. So there's still a lot to do for the tourism industry, but I'm sure it will come eventually, and it's going to happen. But we are now the mirror image in a sense to the Mediterranean islands, who then struggle with the winter months. That they would like to have some more tourism, and then we want to have the summer tourism. So let's see how this plays out. I also talked to our Athens colleagues about the Greek demand. Is there something that they see in July or August already being too hot? But what they are saying is that it actually has that spread out into more months.
Yeah.
So that now you can see that from April to October they have more demand, and I guess for all the service providers and airports as well and airlines, it's better to have 6 months of smooth and stable demand than just two months of peak demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Which sort of is slightly counter to what we were saying earlier about seasonality, but maybe worth a dig into some of the more seasonal markets to see how that's shifted.
Sure.
I think the other interesting thing is back to our conversation about North America, and the proportion of the market that might have gone from Europe to the US. If those people are sort of purposely not traveling to the US this summer, where else are they going? Are they going east? Are they going Disneyland's not there yet in Abu Dhabi, but it's coming. Or are they traveling to other parts of Europe? And to some extent, does that compound the summer seasonal peak? And I don't think we're seeing that yet. It's going to be interesting to see this summer. As we keep seeing US visitor arrival figures fall, where are people choosing to travel to instead?
Yeah, we can't. I mean, it's subtle movements, isn't it? It's it is never going to be a wholesale big shift of capacity unless there is a massive geopolitical type event or weather disruption. So it's shifting a percentage here and a percentage there, and you look at it 5 years later and you think, wow, they've made pretty good inroads into that market. It's just all about time and patience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deirdre, if I may answer, Turov asked on the chat about the Tromsø comparison to Rovaniemi. So Rovaniemi had about 0.6 million in 2019, and last year it was 1.1 million. So Tromsø growth in terms of percentage is higher, but both have seen the same thing happening.
But off of smaller base though, Petri. So it's easier to get such large numbers off a smaller base.
Yeah, and having been to both destinations, the enduring appeal of the Northern Lights is a significant factor, isn't it? And we happen to be in a I'm not sure it's as much as a decade, but we happen to be in a period where the visibility of the Northern Lights is seemingly better than it has been, and I think that continues to sort of drive growth to your part of the world, doesn't it?
And in the summer you don't need a hotel room either, so that's even better.
But good news in terms of it's then not just a December Santa market, is it? It's a broader it's a broader season.
Of course Santa is peaking around Christmas, and he is then off the charts, but of course people are also coming to see him after the Christmas. Maybe they want to make a complaint about the gifts or something, but you can see that happening. But of course now we have seen the season extending to February and March in some cases. And the thing which is happening now is that also there's a flight from Rovaniemi to Tromsø, so that a lot of the overseas visitors want to combine.
Doing double dip.
So that has now come. It started last winter, and now it extended. Finnair is operating that one.
It was interesting because we were talking a couple of weeks ago, weren't we? And we were discussing how the UK operators are putting capacity into Lapland up to Christmas and a couple of weeks after, and then that capacity basically falls away quite significantly, doesn't it? And you think it's linked to the school holidays and the fact that take your child out of school in the UK and you could potentially get a fine. But it's also, I think, as much about it's a complementary time period to then switch to the winter ski season and put that capacity into Geneva and Chambéry and other locations.
Yeah, we see this especially with airlines like EasyJet that they do it.
Yeah. Okay, let's come back to the deck because there's a few more slides that we'd like to share with you. So then we looked at domestic, we're now looking at international. As we saw, a sort of at global regional level, more optimistic picture, and that sort of runs true across the bigger markets in Europe as well. So steady growth, strong growth in some markets, in particular Poland, Ireland, Italy. Not a surprise that these markets are benefiting from the shift of some Ryanair capacity into the international sectors. And if we look at same kind of breakdown, so the percentage growth by country market this quarter versus last, and then which type of carrier is driving growth in those markets. You can see evidently strong low-cost carrier capacity additions in Spain, Italy, Poland, Ireland, those countries that are doing well. So some of that is, as I sort of said earlier, is perhaps not overtly about underlying demand in those markets. It's more about carriers choosing to redeploy their capacity into markets, which fundamentally is because there's strong demand. But there are other things at play, aren't there? That's driving these shifts.
Sometimes it's demand, but sometimes it's also to demonstrate to others their ability to both move that capacity and stimulate new markets. I mean, why has Poland suddenly got a 20% increase in capacity? We know that's nearly all being driven by one particular airline who's decided, for whatever reason, to focus there. So I think it's interesting how an airport can be a benefactor from an airline suddenly changing its network decisions, and equally you can lose out. And in the first quarter of the year, some of those airlines are particularly aggressive at taking that stance and moving capacity quickly.
Yeah.
And in most cases, it's these regional airports who don't have their hub carrier there.
Yeah, and that's exactly to the heart of this discussion, isn't it? Regional airports are the ones that suffer first. They're the ones who lose their twice weekly service from their regional airport to some sunspot or some capital city in Europe. It just disappears, which makes those domestic services and subsequent connectivity through their hub airports like Helsinki very important.
Leading nicely into my next slide, John. Thank you for that.
Right. I did look at this slide. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Not coincidence then. So just sort of taking that to the next step, I guess, we've taken a look at European airports by category, seat size category. And there are obviously various definitions of tiers of airports out there. ACI, probably the most well known. We've applied a slightly different level of threshold here because we wanted to look at these smaller regional airports sort of through that lens, I guess. So we've assumed over 10 million seats, tier 1, 2.5 to 10 million is tier 2, 500,000 to 2.5 tier 3, and then tier 4 and tier 5, very small, 100,000 to 500,000 and under 100,000 for tier 5. And very evidently, what you were just talking about there, John, has happened. This is just a straight look at annual capacity for 19 versus 25. Considerable reduction in those very small airports, and also across the sort of mid-size airports in this analysis. What is quite interesting is the overall volume of airports has reduced as well. So in 19, we had 725 airports with scheduled services in Europe. Some would argue perhaps too many, particularly if you overlay a profitability test against that. That had fallen to 664 by last year. And, as you can see, the reduction in numbers very much in the small airport category. And interestingly, just under half of those airport numbers have networks that only focus on Europe. So all of that regional connectivity across small airports in Europe. I suppose I was a little. Was I surprised that was a bigger number, perhaps, than I thought it would be? Maybe not.
I don't know. It's such a challenge. I mean, Petri, the Finavia portfolio has some very good airports with great growth potential and opportunity, and equally you've got some that are very challenging in terms of operations and maintaining a regular sustainable business for for Finavia. It's the same in the United Kingdom. There's lots of regional airports where after 10 o'clock in the morning there isn't another flight until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's the same in Ireland. It's really, really tough to maximise the asset value.
And if you think about it, most of these airports were built during the era when there was no high-speed trains or highways between the cities. So they have different competition now from the surface sectors.
Yeah, modal challenges. To your point earlier about increasing use of video conferencing, how do they not only how do they survive, and what is their growth trajectory in the future? Because they'll all need investment and reinvestment in the coming years. New security requirements, the perimeter fence will have a hole cut in it. Someone's got to go and repair it, whatever it happens to be. But how can the airlines that operate at those locations operate profitably? And that's just as important, because if you cannot guarantee or give an airline an opportunity to be profitable, then it's not going to work from either side. The supply relationship isn't there.
I've noticed something discussing with the airlines, that after the COVID, there was about 2 years that they were not really interested in discussing smaller airports or taking the risk of flying to those. But now lately, I sense more appetite for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
I don't know if you can see any concrete cases in your data, but simply the airlines are looking for new opportunities.
On a year-round basis, or
no, it could be seasonal, yeah. So,
but seasonal is sometimes the door opener, isn't it, to a year-round service? I think it's interesting if we look at capacity share across those sizes of airports, going back to 2010, just to kind of blur the pandemic impact a little. There has been a marked shift, marked 2%. So in 2010, those big airports over 10 million seats a year took 60% of capacity, and you can see the distribution for the others. And we've just spun this out into a separate chart so that we can have a bit of visibility. And definitely some of that capacity has gone to the second and third sort of size of airports in our categorization. But I think that's more about the shift that we saw in more direct international services from regional airports, perhaps, than anything else. And there has been a bit of a post-pandemic. I guess you saw that a bit of a shift happening 2015 to 2019, and then that's continued to some extent. So I think if we dug down into that, we would see that, the growth of Emirates, the growth of Turkish Airlines into regional airports across Europe would be a driver for that.
I don't fear for those tier 2 and tier 3 airports. It's the tier 4s and the tier 5s where they have almost this disproportionate impact on the local economy. The twice daily flight from a UK regional airport to Amsterdam and connectivity to the rest of the KLM network or to Paris is absolutely crucial. But those markets are not going to be able to sustain a Turkish Airlines A320. They are definitely 100-seat type markets twice a day. And perhaps even 3 or 4 years ago, they were 100-seat markets 4 times a day. And the airlines have made conscious decisions to stay in there, but with lower frequency. And, if your connectivity isn't as good as it used to be, so what? Because there's no other game in town. And you'll have to buy a ham and cheese roll and Schiphol, which isn't a bad thing, but it's those really small regional airports, and how are they going to be able to make a go of it in the next decade? What is their business model? How does it change? how can they cover all the cost of their head office and their administration costs? These are, some of them are owned by local councils. Is there a need for Doncaster Airport in the United Kingdom to reopen? Question mark.
I think it's a really interesting proposition, isn't it? Because you've got this tension between airports that serve a catchment area, perhaps that is a peripheral geographic area, and many of Petri's airports are in that category, and indeed Torolf in Norway as well, where connectivity is essential for these communities to be able to exist in terms of attend hospital appointments or do business in the capital or whatever the driving force is. And there's an argument, and of course we still have PSO schemes in Europe which aim to provide support for those lifeline type services. Then you've got airports in that sort of tier 4, tier 5 category where, as you said earlier, Petri, they were built in a time before there was high-speed rail or before there was better surface connectivity to bigger locations. And what's really interesting is one of them, it's a completely different story, but in India, the desire, so the Prime Minister in India has a desire for everyone to be within 100 kilometers of an airport, and completely different demographic, and there's an emerging market. But actually, some of the challenges that our very small airports wrestle with is that is there too much choice, and is it should everybody be in a position where their local airport is just 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers away, and you have a collection of smaller airports that are all struggling to survive with their capacity and their catchment.
Cardiff versus Bristol in the same catchment area. Yeah. How many in the Midlands in the United Kingdom all competing for the same market essentially? Petri, here's an interesting question, and I don't know if you can even answer this. If the airports in Finland were privatised, how many private investors would be interested in your tier 4 and 5 airports?
Well, currently they normally talk to our CEO and CFO, so I don't know if what is their stand on this, but theoretically I would say they are not interested in that portfolio. You have a huge cost base, you have a huge asset base, and then the revenues are minimal, so it's not a good business case. But as Deirdre said, that there might be some other values connecting to the community, to the hospitals or things like that in the capital area. But I think there should be some discussion on whether what is the time limit that you have to be able to make from some place to these services. That is it acceptable that it's 2, 3, 4 hours on surface rather than going to the airport, flying 30 minutes. And if you start calculating the whole journey time going to the airport and waiting for the flight and then at the other end, you might not save that much with the flights that in most cases are PSO publicly funded. So there should be some discussion on this.
So Deirdre, if you go back a couple of slides, we were talking about there was 724 active airports. Now it's now reduced. And if you look at the absolute count of how many airports are in that tier 4 and 5 category, not percentage. Yeah, is it half? Is it half of the airports you've got there?
Must be
pretty close
to it. Yeah, must be.
We're saying, wow, they're marginal. They're marginal. And for anyone who's in, and some of them are state owned, and actually most of them are probably state owned or local council owned. And if you were to try and privatise those, whoever was going to take those over has got the whole issue of taking over the workforce. And these types of airports have people who've been employed there for 20 or 30 years, and you've got all their pension costs and everything else you've got to bring across with you. These are difficult assets to make work.
Yeah, challenging times. I think this just probably illustrates in a slightly different way the challenge, because what we're showing here is connectivity between these types of airports, and this is again 2025 versus 2019. So this sort of quadrant of the matrix, so the connectivity, I guess between the bigger airports has improved and focused more on those bigger airports, whereas actually significant drop from tier 3, so the 500,000 to 2.5 million seats, to those other smaller airports. So, and I guess we're seeing to some extent, the collapse of some of those regional carriers that have disappeared in the last 5 to 10 years, that were performing sort of those roles in terms of connecting people between, Southampton and I'm not going to get an example right off there.
Southampton, Edinburgh, Southampton, Aberdeen, Southampton, Belfast Harbour. All of these things are,
or the Eastern Airways network, or those regional carriers that are disappearing because the cost of operating both into those small regional airports that can't heavily discount airport charges because of all the reasons we've talked about in terms of covering their costs. And I think there's also a significant shift in expectation now about fares, and to some extent you're not comparing apples with apples, are you? When you look at a regional service within Finland or within the UK, to low-cost carrier fares when you can go for a day trip to Paris or to wherever for less than £50 or €50. Regional airfares have never been competitive in that way. But I think the mindset now about where you can travel and the cost of that just makes it a really tough environment, doesn't it, for carriers and airports.
In the UK, when Flybe were trying to operate an expansive domestic network, the airfares, a classic Southampton Edinburgh airfare would be £70. If you took that journey by train, it would be £350, and it'd take you 6-7 hours. So it was completely the wrong way round. Is it the same in Finland? Or is the train fares?
No, the train is cheaper, but it's not always the fastest way to get around. So the small cities or small places where we have airport might not have a good rail connection. So then you are bound to fly. This Pierre Fabrizio was asking about or making a comment on the regional aircrafts by my mainline carriers. That's also the issue, that if you have these regionals, will they be able to have the interline and cooperation with the mainlines if they want to connect, and do actually the mainlines help them to survive in that sense?
And we know the answer is no. They don't help them. They don't want interline agreements, or they have to sign up for a high level of display in the GDS systems, which means more expense per booking made. Interline ticketing agreements tend to be one way, so you can't cut a ticket on a regional airlines paper for a first class seat to Singapore. with someone, whatever it happens to be. You know, life is a lot more difficult when you are a regional airline and a regional airport. You just don't have the scale. It be the scale of the aircraft or the systems that you need.
And you know, the comparable, so we looked at airport numbers in terms of volumes of airports. If we look at airlines, going back to 2010, the number of European domiciled airlines operating in Europe, so those that are registered and operate here, has fallen by 25% over that time period. And the share that those big carriers, the top 20, have taken of capacity has gone up by almost 10%, up to nearly 90% of all capacity operating on just 20 carriers. So, you know, I think all of that is kind of taking me to what's the answer? What's the future for regional aviation?
Is it franchise type partnerships? Well, we've seen legacy airlines in Europe try those and walk away from them on a number of occasions because they just don't work, you know, and they burden that legacy airline with more cost and complexity. I don't know. As an airport operator, you see regional airlines coming along, and you must have meetings with them. You think, I've got to support them. But deep down, you know that their chances of long-term survival are quite challenging.
Yeah, no easy answers. I think it feels like we started with optimism and we're now not so optimistic. I feel a bit responsible for that by painting a bit of a doom and gloom picture.
We have to end this with something positive. So I have one thing
Yeah,
in
we
my
do.
mind that although we are seeing that the regional airports are not really in that category where you see success, but in the north of Europe you have Norway, or Avinor building one new one in Norway, and then quite recently, a couple of years ago, they opened one in Sweden, so the Scandinavian mountain airport. So there are some areas and some investors who see the potential in also the regional airports. So this is a positive note, I think.
Yeah, I think if you had a blank piece of paper and you built or designed and developed an airport and you did it, you know, from scratch, you maybe would find a business case or an opportunity in most countries, or you would, you know, you'd find an angle where you could close a couple of airports or you could attract business from elsewhere. Problem is, though, as you say, we've got far too many runways in Europe at this moment in time that are not being used, and we've got no real desire to use them in the short term.
Yeah, and you go.
And then you get to that, you know, that horrible question of, in one of the charts and some of the data we saw, that a tier 3 airport certainly could have a service to a tier 1 airport. So we're talking for an example, a Leeds, Bradford to London Heathrow. And then the service starts and it's big fanfare, lots of investment from the local council. And it's operated by British Airways. And at some point, British Airways decide, oh, it's not performing at the standard we require it to, or it's not giving us a return. Maybe I'll reduce the frequency and use that slot for a JFK service with a wide body flight, and I'll make a lot of money, and 50% of the seats will be in a premium cabin, etc., etc., etc. And then, you know, next year you look at it and say, well, I won't operate twice a day, 3 times a day. I'll only operate twice a day, because the people in Leeds won't mind. They'll still have connectivity, etc., etc., etc. And I'll use that flight slot to go to to Los Angeles. And you feel that you're always hanging on to that regional service, to that tier 1 airport, aren't you? They're not protected. They're not ring fenced.
They're not guaranteed, are they? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And then I think it's about, you know, we know enough of our colleagues in the industry who work hard every day on growing their regional airports. I think it's about doing all you can to have a community behind you that appreciates the importance of that connectivity and campaigns for it and pushes for it. And I think that's just the reality of the struggle, isn't it? It's not, there's no sort of amazing solution to it. I think it's about trying to make sure that your stakeholders, whether that's business, local residents, are all as aligned as they can be about the importance of keeping that connectivity and retaining it and using it. That's the other challenge, isn't it?
Use it or lose it. You know, when I was working for Airlines, I went to many regional airports and told the local chambers of commerce and all the rest of the great corporate commercial community, you've got to use it or lose it. And ultimately, they lost it because they'll tell you, yeah, we'll fly with you, and they don't. Or they're wedded to the National Airlines frequent flyer program, or corporate travel policy says we're not going to do that.
That's the thing. That's the thing we see.
Yeah. It's multi-layered, isn't it? The reason for airport choice and how people make decisions about which airline to travel with, or which airport to travel from is not always as straightforward as it might. You know,
just give you a classic dilemma I had when I was working for an airline. We flew 3 times a day from London City from Edinburgh to London City on one aircraft, and we made a modest profit. But I was always under pressure because I wasn't utilising the aircraft to its maximum efficiency. And the only way I could do that was to put a 4th frequency on the route. So I did that. I compromised the return schedule from London City to Edinburgh, so businessmen said that's not going to work. I increased my operating cost. I increased my aircraft utilisation. My route profitability went down. And yet when my CEO was in Edinburgh Airport and he saw an aircraft that was sitting there for 4 hours, he pointed it and say, why aren't you using that? And it's, you know, that trade-off is really difficult sometimes for an airline.
Yeah.
Really difficult.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come to the end of our slot. There's challenge ahead, isn't there? There's some optimism and there are pockets of growth, as we've seen. But I think the challenges for regional aviation, not just in Europe and beyond, are here to stay, aren't they? I fear we'll still be. We can come back a year from now, and what might have changed, which doesn't feel very progressive, but
air tolls. That's the solution. We all get into air tolls.
Yeah, maybe. And that's one of our audience has commented that the availability of aircraft and right sizing a fleet to fit regional short haul needs is a gap, and it is absolutely.
So challenging.
Well, thank you, Petri, for joining us. I hope we haven't depressed your morning too much.
No, it's lunchtime, so I'll be happy.
Hey, he doesn't matter. He's got new services to China, new services to Dubai. He's sorted for the rest of the year.
Lots of optimism, taking everybody out of the cold into the warm. Well, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks, John, as ever, for your thoughts and insights. We'll be back next month, possibly. I think definitely with a bit more optimism, but we might focus on North America. So, maybe I'm promising something I can't deliver. But we'll be back next month with the next webinar. In the meantime, you can sign up to OAG's blog if you don't already, where there are lots of insights about different markets and what's happening. And if there are any questions or anything you want to raise with us, then please feel free to contact us. A copy of the slide deck and the recording will be coming out later today, and we'll see you all hopefully on the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.